Excellent. Okay, so you guys know the drill. You're all on mute right now. And if you have a question, just type it in the chat box. So before we really get started in our lecture today, which is going to be all about interactivity and using dashboard actions, and we'll go over kind of more of the filter stuff, and we'll talk about parameters today. But before we do that, I just wanted to say really, really impressive, nice work on our first assignment, you guys. I've gone through and given comments on most of them. I think I did that last Friday, so if you published since last Friday, I haven't given you any comments yet, but I'll do that today after this. But really, really good job. I'm really excited for how well you guys are already doing. I think you guys are going to be awesome by the end of this. So today we're going to talk about interactivity and kind of the basics about, go a little beyond the basics about filters, which we kind of went over a little bit very briefly last week. And we'll also talk about dashboard actions, and then we'll go into parameters. So I wanted to start just by talking and kind of reviewing filters a little bit. So I showed you this at the end of my lecture last week, and actually, funny story, after that, this actually got blogged on the radio station's blog. So I'm probably going to talk about it a lot more because it has a lot of good examples in here. So in this dashboard, it actually it makes use of a couple things we're going to talk about today. One is the quick filter. So this is how you can get down to what DJ and what they play. This dashboard also uses a parameter, and we'll go more into what a parameter is. But basically, a parameter in this case is a way to choose what you're looking at. So right now we're looking at which artist they play the most. But we could also look at which album they played the most, or which song they played the most. So let's just start by making this sheet from scratch. So I'm going to come here to a new blank sheet, and I'm going to find the fields I want. So the first thing I want is I want number of records, which is, in my data set, every individual row is a different song that was played on the radio. The number of records, that's just how many songs were played. And then I'm going to take the artist and put it on rows. So drag that, put it there. Now, because there's so many different artists, this radio station has played over 17,000 artists in 1 year. They're a very eclectic radio station, to say the least. It's asking me, would you really like to put that much? Because Tableau is saying, you know, that's going to be a lot. You're going to have to be scrolling a lot on that. Are you sure you don't want to filter this? But don't worry, Tableau. I know what I'm doing. So you can see it's currently ordered in alphabetical order. That's why everything starts with a number right now. So I'm going to click the sort button up here and sort artist by descending number of records. You can see my top artist is Arcade Fire. And then I'm going to take my DJ and I'm going to put that on color. So when I have this overall view here, I can see all the different DJs and what they play. So something I did, just a quick formatting aside here on this first one, you can see there's actually lines in between them. I did that because when you have colors that are this similar next to each other, sometimes it can be hard to see where one ends and where one begins. Now, there would be a couple ways I could fix this. I could use a different color palette that wasn't rainbow, but I kind of like the rainbow, and I think it actually looks nice to have them kind of in color order so that they kind of look like they fade from one to another. But something I can do to separate them a little is hit the color button over here and add a border. So I'm going to add just a white border around these, and that gives them a little bit of separation. So now talking about the quick filter. So the quick filter is the way that I'm going to switch to only look at one DJ's plays. So I'm going to want the filter to be on DJ. And there's two ways I can make this filter. I can drag it to filters and start checking things off like that. Or I can just right click here and say show quick filter. And you can see when I do that, there's all my DJs. Now the default quick filter to come up is always this checked list, but sometimes that's not really the best way to have a filter. So in this case, the list is pretty long, so that's already kind of a bummer because it's taking up a lot of space. And when I put this on a dashboard, it would take up a lot of space if it was this big checklist. Another thing is, I don't know if I really need to have the ability to select multiple DJs. Maybe it might be cool just to compare, 3 or 4. But I could also change this to a single value list. And now I'm just looking at one DJ at a time. So to change what kind of filter you use, you go and click on your filter. There's this little drop down here. You click on that, and there's a bunch of different options about your quick filters. So these ones down here are your display options, the different things you can use to display it. So right now we're at a single value list, and that's what makes these radio buttons. I could also change it to a drop down, which is what I have in my dashboard over here. And that is a really nice feature because it takes up very little space. I like to use drop downs probably more than any other quick filter type because they save a lot of space. And I think if you really have, I'd say, a list bigger than 6, then I would really suggest using a drop down. Otherwise, your quick filter gets a little large for your dashboard. But maybe I wanted to have the multiple selection like I had before with the checklist, so that we can do that thing where we're comparing multiple DJs. That's kind of cool, but I don't want it to take up this much space. What I could also do is do a multiple values drop down. So this combines a checkbox with a drop down menu. So now I can pick as many or as few of these as I want. And there are some other quick filter types that we didn't look at here. So there's a slider. This one would really make more sense if you were working with continuous data or something that you wanted people to kind of scroll through from one to another. There's also the custom list. So this is when you just start typing things and see what comes up. So if I wanted, what other DJs do I want? Maybe. So this one's only really good if people know what they're searching for. So maybe if you're doing something, a quick filter on zip code, for example, that would be a good thing to have in this kind of list that you can add multiple zip codes into so people could compare their zip code and the zip code around them. Wildcard match is also just another search kind of thing. So I could search for, and it would just show me the different Johns now. So that's how quick filters work. Now, when we're talking about filters, there's more to them than just quick filters. And you can see that if you click on the full filter here. So we have the general filter. That's what the quick filter is using, where you just have a list and you can select and add whatever you want. And just to note, you can have a filter without having the quick filter displayed. So if you're doing a data project and you have more data than you actually need, you could just only select the things you want to show here. We also have a filter. You can filter by condition. So if I wanted to do something like I only want to see people who have at least 50 plays, I could filter that. Let me just go back here. I'm going to add another filter just to show you some of these other filters and how they can be useful. So I'm going to add a filter on artists. So talking about the filtering by condition here, if I only wanted to see filters for people with 100 plays, and I apply that, there we go. These are the 3 people that got a total of 100 plays. I could also make it for something like, I want to see people greater than 100 plays. It's a pretty big list still. What about 200 plays? All right, so there it is. That's everyone who had more than 200 plays. Another thing we can do with these filters is called a top N filter. So this filter will automatically figure out what the top number of fields are, or the bottom, and show you those. So if I said, show me the top 10 number of records, or the top 10 artists by number of records. There we go. And I could make it so that this changes with each DJ, and you can see each DJ's top 10. So I'm going to switch this back to a drop down here. Now, what happens if I change the DJ? You can see it actually sticks with the same top 10 each time. The reason for this is because it's filtering artists to the top 10 artists overall first, and then filtering to the DJ. We actually wanted to filter by DJ first. So we're going to do this by making DJ a context filter. So if you right click on DJ and say apply to context, what that will mean to Tableau is that before you do anything, I want you to do this filter first. So now when we click through the different DJs, or we should be able to. Here's my top. I also don't want that in here. Okay. So now we see just their top 10. And you can see it's completely different for each person. So we can see the overall top 10 for everyone and different top 10s for the different DJs. So that's kind of the power of context filters. And once you have multiple context filters in here, the way they're kind of organized is basically it'll always be the one on top first and going down. So there might be cases where you have a lot of different filters on top of each other. And that's totally normal and something you start to see the more interaction you get on filters. All right, so that's kind of a basic review of just your typical filters and quick filters. So before I move on to dashboard actions, do you have any questions about that? Anyone? Just give you a second here to type it in the chat box if you do. Okay, doesn't sound like there's any questions, so I'm going to move on now. So next we're going to talk about dashboard actions. So some of you, I commented a little bit on your assignments and talked about dashboard actions. And I think some of you probably already know a little bit about dashboard actions judging by your workbooks. But let's just take a look at some examples I've made to kind of go over the different kinds of dashboard actions and really what you can do with them. So something I do with dashboard actions very often is using them to create kind of buttons at the top. So this is a visualization I made for allrecipes.com. So they were comparing how different states, like what the #1 recipe in each state is for different parts of a Thanksgiving meal. So you can see right now we're looking at pie, but we could also change to what appetizers they like, what kinds of salads they eat. But this one is funny to me just because there are 3 states that actually consider Jello salad a salad. That's their #1 salad instead of like salad with vegetables in it. So the way this is all controlled is through dashboard actions. I have these buttons up here this is actually a sheet, and I'll show you an example of making these. And it controls what the map is being filtered to. It also controls what all the things in this box is being filtered to. And this is something I do pretty often, having these kinds of buttons on the top. I did it here with this is a funny dashboard I made about Santa using big data to track if people are on the naughty or nice list. So in the same way, I've taken these pictures and I'm using them like buttons to highlight something. So this time, instead of filtering, I'm highlighting them on this bar chart down here. And then I'm also using it to change the text here if they're naughty or nice, to change these 2 tables down here. And here's another example of me doing that kind of button thing. So this is the history of drum corps, which is kind of like professional marching band. So if we click the buttons up here, it'll show their scores throughout history. It'll highlight where they are on the map. It also changes this video here. This is using a URL action, which is another kind of action. So that's kind of the power of dashboard actions. So let's talk about what the 3 kinds of dashboard actions are and how you can use them. So I'm actually going to use this dashboard as an example because it actually uses all 3. Let's download this right now. Okay, so here's that marching band dashboard we were just looking at. And like I said, this is an example that has all 3 of my dashboard actions in it. It does filters, it does highlights, and it does URLs. So to make a dashboard action, you have to first, of course, be on a dashboard. So once again, the difference between a dashboard and a sheet is just one singular graph, whereas the dashboard is where you drag all of those graphs together and make them interact with each other. So once you're on the dashboard, you can go up here to Dashboard and Actions. You can see I have 5 different actions here, 2 filters, a highlight, and a couple hyperlinks. And when you come to Dashboard Actions, this will probably be blank because you haven't made any actions yet. And you'll add one by saying Add Action. And it will ask you which one you want to do, filter, highlight, or URL. So once again, the differences between these are like this. A filter is how when I click on one of these, it changes this graph to only show data for that drum corps. It also changes some of the information here that I have in text boxes. That's also using a filter. A highlight is how when I am hovering over one of these symbols here for the different marching bands, you can see that on the map below, it's showing me where that marching band is located. So if I wanted to know where the academy is located, it looks like they're located in Arizona. And that's true, Tempe, Arizona is where they're located. The third kind of action, the URL action, is what is controlling this YouTube video. So you can see that when I click on different drum corps, different YouTube videos are open up, and this is a little sample of kind of what one of their shows look like. So those are the 3 kinds of actions. So let's go over what makes each one of these actions. Take a look at this first filter action. When you're editing an action, there's basically 3 sections here. There's the source, the target sheet, and the target filter. So the source is what are you interacting with that is causing the action to happen. So in this case, I'm interacting with the core icons. So when I click on these icons, I want something to happen. And the run action on is telling me, when do you want this to happen? Right now I'm saying I want it to happen on select. So every time I click on an icon, I want this action to happen. I could also make it happen on a hover or on a menu. So let's take a look at what this looks like if we made the action on a hover. If I make the action on a hover, you can see I don't have to click anything. I just have to float over it and everything changes. Or at least the scores and the information and everything that was controlled by that filter changes. Of course, this isn't really the best way to do this, since as soon as I leave the icon, it kind of goes back and it's hard to read. So hovering for this particular filter probably doesn't make a lot of sense. I could also do a menu. What this does is make a link in the tooltip. So if I say click to see scores as the name, whatever you put as the name is going to be what the link is called in the menu. You can see now there's this thing that says click to see scores. And if I click that, then it changes everything. So those are the 3 types of run actions on select. Now this button that says run on single select only makes it so that you can only ever click on one button at a time. As it stands, I don't have that checked, so I could actually click on multiple buttons at a time, and I could do that by holding Control and clicking, and now you can see there's multiple lines here. But it kind of messes up the way I have these text things set up. So I'm actually going to say run on single select only. Okay, the next part we have here is our target sheet. So this is, we know what's making the action happen, and this is where do we want the action to actually take place. What's changing when you click on an icon? The things I wanted to change were the core info, so that's the text that was there, their position over time, so that's their score here. Sheet 8, I think that's another piece of core info that was in there. So the more of these things that I select, the more things that this icon, that these core icons will affect. So if I also clicked map here and said OK, now when I click an icon, it will also filter the map. You can see it only shows you one at a time now. I also have this section here that says clearing the selection will. And this gives you 3 options. You can leave the filter, show all the values, or exclude all the values. Right now I have it leaving the filter. So when I click on something, and if I click on it again to kind of unselect it, it still remains as if that filter is on these 3 sheets that the action affects. So my other options for this are to show all the values, and if this happens, can anyone guess what's going to happen? I can click one of these, and if I click off of it, it shows me everything. You can see right there. and all these dots, that means it's showing me everything. And my third option is for when I clear the selection to exclude everything. So that's going to do just what it sounds like. I'm going to click on something, it's going to filter. I'm going to click on it again, and it won't show me anything because it's excluding everything now. So for this particular dashboard, I think that having it leave the filter on makes the most sense because I only really want to see one course history at a time. All right. So that is a filter action. Any questions about that? All right, let's move on to highlights then. So highlights is how when I hover over one of these icons, I don't have to click anything. It shows in the map where it is. That's what a highlight does. So in Dashboard Actions, I can edit my highlight here. And just like filters, highlights have the same 3 run actions on. I have it running the action on hover, but I could also make it run on select. So if I change this to select, see, I'm hovering, but nothing's happening to the map. But if I click on something, it's highlighted down here. All this data changes from the filter we made. And that's how that works. You can also see we have the same target sheets stuff right here. So where is it happening to? And you can see that I actually have this happening to more than just the map. I have it so that when you are highlighting an icon, when you're using an icon to highlight, it's also changing most championship wins and top shows. We hit OK. We scroll down here. You can see this band actually has never had any championship wins or winning shows. We select a winning team here, like the Blue Devils. They win all the time. You can see they have the most championship wins. And now in this table, anytime they won, it's highlighted. So one more thing to point out about the way I have this highlight action set up is that I have it targeted to certain things. You can see I'm highlighting just the core name. There's a reason for this. When you're doing target highlighting, or when you're doing any kind of action, you can see that I have that section here on filters too, target filters. Sometimes there might be certain things you want to highlight, but not others. So for example, if I was to highlight something on this chart, I could highlight both the year and the score and who it is. And maybe, so there's a lot of different options of what would be getting highlighted. So if I only want to highlight one particular thing, like, for example, in what we're doing right here, the core icon, I really want the highlighting to be just based on the name of the core. I don't want it to be based on what their YouTube is, or I have some groups here that I don't want to use. I want it to be just their name. And the more you do these kinds of actions, sometimes you'll see you make an action and it's changing more things than you want it to. And that's usually because you're not targeting the right thing. So if you have something like, for example, if I wanted my celebrities here, I just want their names to target just their names here. I don't want it to also look at what year it is or anything like that. I just want their names. Same thing with the Thanksgiving one. I want it to target just the category of what recipe it is. I don't want to target the individual recipes themselves, because if we look at this, we click on pie, we click on a state, you can see the top pies in that state. And I don't want to filter it to just only show that one pie. I want to show all of them. So that's why I'm filtering on just the recipe type. So that's why you would use a target. Okay. So that's highlighting. It's very, very similar to filtering, as you can see, as far as setting it up. And I think kind of get the idea of the difference between the two. Highlighting will show the other data still in there, just faded out, whereas filtering gets rid of any other data that was in there. Okay, any questions on highlighting before we move on to URL actions? Okay. So URL actions, that's what's controlling this YouTube video down here. So if we look at our data, I'm just going to view the data in here. You can see that I have a core name, I have their page for their profiles, I have their program, and over here I have something called YouTube ID. So this is, I went to YouTube, I looked up a video for each one of these bands, and I put an ID for them. And the YouTube ID, what that actually is when you're embedding YouTube videos, we just go to any old videos here. When you share, the thing that comes after the slash of YouTube, that's the YouTube ID. And that's what I'm going to use to make this dashboard action. Now, I did that just to save some space in that row, but if you wanted to make a dashboard action that used the full URL, if that's easier for you to do, you could do that too. So when I make the dashboard action, I have actions here, and you can see I have hyperlink right here. And I actually have two because it changes based on what drum corps you're looking at. But I've also made it so that all of these top shows down here, if you wanted to see what is this crazy show that got so many points, you can click that, and that will also change the YouTube video. So that's why I have two different dashboard actions. I have one for the corps and one for the individual shows. And setting them up was basically the same. We look at this dashboard action here by just clicking it and clicking edit. So I have my source sheet just like I did for filtering and highlighting. And my source sheet in this case is the icons, because this is how the video changes when I click on an icon. And just like filtering and highlighting, I can choose when to run my action: hover, select, or menu. In this case, I wanted the YouTube video to change whenever I clicked an icon. And then I just entered my URL. So since I'm working with YouTube videos, I just needed to go to youtube.com. You can see this is a special thing you can do with YouTube videos. I did /embed and then the input, the YouTube ID. So the reason I did /embed is because if I didn't, let me show you what would happen if I didn't have that in there. Without that, it'll load the full YouTube page. So you can see it's actually loading an entire page. Instead, this is just a little trick that I found out by myself from when you're looking at YouTube videos. If you click the embed link, you can see this is the link they give you when they're giving you the iframe to embed a YouTube video, youtube.com/embed/ the other stuff. And if I put that up in here, you can see it just opens up a frameless video. And this can be resized to however big the window is. So that's why this is kind of a useful little hack to have YouTube videos in your dashboards, because they'll always automatically size. So that's why I have the /embed in there. And then I have YouTube ID. So that's the name of the variable that I had that has the YouTube thing in it. So I could put whatever variables I wanted here, core names or what have you. So this can be useful for other things. For example, let me actually show you one. I think I have it. Here we go. Here's another workbook that has a URL action. You can see this picture loading down here. What that actually is Google Street View. So I click on one of these locations, which are these are places that had reports of graffiti in New York City, particularly in Brooklyn, and it opens up the Google Street View. So I did that using a URL action. So you can see I have the URL action right here. I have it running on select, and what I did is I have the Google Street View API here. That's how I got this little URL. And then I'm inputting latitude, which is a variable in my data set, and longitude. And then it's automatically querying Google and seeing where that is. So this is useful for this project. This is the project I worked on with New York Daily News, because they wanted to kind of get a visual of, okay, so this place is getting a lot of graffiti. What does that look like? So you can see that you can actually see the graffiti that this place is getting bombarded with. This one has a lot too. So that's another example of using URL actions. URL actions don't always have to link to something in your viz either. You can use a URL action to open up something in a different tab. So that's something I did. Close this guy here. That's something I did in this Thanksgiving one. If I click right here on the recipe, you can see in the tooltip it says click to view on all recipes. This is because I have a URL action set up here, and instead of having it on select, I have it set up to be the text. So when we're looking at our dashboard actions here, instead of being on select, we can have it in menu, and that's what makes it show up in the tooltip here. And instead of opening up somewhere on the dashboard, it opens up in a different tab. Now, if you wanted it to open up in the dashboard, you use a URL element. So that's what I have in here, where the YouTube goes. This is a URL web page element. So when you're dragging things into your dashboard, you can drag text like this, or you can drag images. That's what this logo is up here, or you can drag in web pages. And if you drag in a web page to your dashboard, whenever you do a URL action, it's automatically going to open up in that box. So this has some repercussions. If you want to use a URL box for one thing, you're going to have to do that for everything. You're not going to be able to open links outside of that URL box. This actually was kind of a bummer for me when I made a dashboard here. So I made a dashboard about my Reddit use. Oh, not that one. That's a different dashboard about Reddit. So I made a dashboard about Reddit use, and I wanted to have these pictures at the top so that when you click on something that got a lot of upvotes, you can see it changes to a picture of, yeah, I'm getting a lot of upvotes. When I posted something that didn't get very many upvotes, it switches to this image of my posts are bad and I should feel bad. But I got a lot of requests for people who said, hey, I want to see what these links actually are. So I wanted to make it so that if you click this, it'll actually load. But I couldn't make it open in a new tab because what it would do is actually load. If I was to make this URL action, it would load up here, and that's not what I wanted. So I just said, well, guess I'm not going to do that. There is a thing called the Tableau JavaScript API, in which I found a way that you can hack your way to doing that. So if you're working on something and you do want to have something that changes a URL box and opens another URL, just email me and I can show you how that works. It's a little complicated, so I'm not going to show it to you right now. Okay, so that's URL actions. Any questions about those? So Richard asks, you can never use a URL action and open an external URL element on the same dashboard. That is correct. At least as far as the out-of-the-box program goes, that is correct. If you use the JavaScript API, it's a little complicated, so I can take that conversation offline if that's something you're very interested in. I was actually planning on making a little tutorial about it anyway, but that's a conversation for another time. Any other questions about URL actions or any of the dashboard actions that I've gone over here? Okay, so we've got 15 minutes left, and I think that's just enough time to cover parameters. So you got a little taste of what a parameter is when I showed you how you can change things here to view by artist, album, or song. I'm going to show you a couple other examples just so that we make sure that what a parameter is really sticking and solidified there in your head. So let me close these ones. So this is a viz about Pokemon. Very hard-hitting data journalism, I know. You can see I did the same kind of thing that I've done in a couple of vizzes I've shown you now, where I have buttons here that filter. So I'm filtering by the different energy types of Pokemon. I don't know how many of you are Pokemon masters like me, but there's different types of Pokemon, and they do different things. So this is how you choose which Pokemon you're looking at. And what I've made here is basically a quadrant chart. So you have the 4 quadrants, low, low, high, high, low, high, high, low. And Pokemon is basically a game that's completely based on math. That's why I think it's so cool. And there are several metrics that are of use in Pokemon. So there's attack, defense, hit points, speed, and then there's also special attack and special defense. I won't get into one of those means because this is not a Pokemon lesson. But I wanted to make a dashboard where people could choose what's interesting to them. So right now we're looking at attack versus defense. So this quadrant are people that are low attack and low defense. So they're just all around pretty weak. Up here are people who are high attack and high defense. Over here we have low attack and high defense, high attack and low defense. Now if I was less interested in attack and more interested in speed, I wanted to know who was fast and who was strong. I could change this to show speed. So now instead of attack down on this axis, we have speed. And it looks like people are a little more evenly distributed when we look at it that way. So these are people who are very fast and very strong. These are people who are pretty slow and weak. These are people that are pretty strong but not very fast. And these are people that are pretty fast but not very strong. So this is all controlled with parameters. And parameters can control more than just what are on the axes. If we go to another example I have here. So this is a dashboard I made to track Bitcoin data and just to show kind of the different powers that you can power parameters. So this first chart, I'm using parameters to choose what line is the blue line and what line is the orange line. Because when you're looking at any kind of stock data, or in this case, any kind of currency data, there are certain things that you might want to see if there's a correlation for. So cost per transaction volume. So I might want to see like the cost per transaction versus the market price of Bitcoin. And we can change these number of transactions to the market price of Bitcoin, hash rate. So there's a lot of different things we can compare here. So instead of changing the axes, I'm changing which line is which. And you can see this is the y-axis for line 1, and this is the y-axis for line 2. This is called a dual axis chart, and that is something you do by bringing two different measures into your rows and then right-clicking and make a dual axis chart. Down here, I have 4 different parameters so that I can plot something on X and Y, kind of like I did with the Pokemon. But I can also change what's changing the size and the color. These are all the kinds of things you can do with parameters. You can use them as a way to switch between different variables. So let me show you how a parameter is made. And we'll go back to my radio station example here. So here I had the parameter that lets you choose between song, album, and artist. So let me show you how that's made. Let's go back to this chart we were making together here. You can see I have a parameter here called choose level. I'm actually going to start from scratch so you can see the whole process. So to make a parameter, you can right click anywhere here in the left data pane and say create parameter. And then you can give it a name. I'm going to call this artist, album, or a song. And you can change the data type. So the data type is what kind of data is this eventually going to be? Is this going to be a float, which means a number with a decimal point? Is it going to be an integer, which is a whole number? A string, which is text? Boolean, which is true or false? Date, which is a date? Or date and time, which is a date and time. In this case, I'm going to make it a string. And then it says, what are the allowable values? If you say all, that means anyone can just type in whatever they want to be the parameter. Now, that's not what we want to do. We actually want to make this a list. so I can list out the 3 things that I want to use. So my first value is artist, and I'm going to display as artist. My second value is album, which I'm going to display as album. And the third value is song, where I'm going to display as song. So the reason we have different values and different display names, because this display name is what's going to show up in the actual control for the parameter, whereas the value is what you're going to use in any calculation you make with a parameter. Because a parameter is pretty much useless unless you're using it in a calculation, as I'm going to show you. In this case, all of our display names were the same as our values. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to create a new calculated field. And this is going to be the field that uses that parameter. So I'm going to call this artist, album, song. And there's a special formula that just works with parameters. It's called case. So anytime you're looking at formulas in Tableau, and I know there's a lot, and a lot of them you'll recognize from Excel or other tools such as that, and a lot of them are unique. So case, you can see it gives you a little guide here to what it's supposed to be. Case is something you use with parameters. So I'm going to say case, and then I'm going to choose the parameter I want. So that's artist, album, or song. So I'm saying this is the expression I want you to look at. And now if we go back to what our syntax is here, you can see it's case expression when value equals something, or when value is something, then this is the thing you want to happen. So that's what I'm going to type. When case is equal to artist, which was our first in the list, then I want this whole calculated field to be just the artist. So that means when I select artist, this field will basically turn into the variable for artist. When I select album, then this field will pretty much turn into the field for album. It'll have the exact same values as the field for album. Lastly, when I choose song, then this is going to turn into this field for song. And then whenever you're doing any kind of logical function in Tableau, you always have to end it. So I say end. Tableau says, all right, that looks good. That calculation is valid. Great. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to replace artist right here with that measure we just made. I'm going to take off this top filter we had. And let's sort again. And if I right-click on my parameter down here and say Show Parameter Control, now I have a similar drop-down to DJ here, and I can use that to switch through. I can look at album, and I can look at song. I can filter out null because it's not really helping anyone. And if I filter out null, it actually will filter it out on all 3 because null on artist, album, and song is all the same thing. So that's how you set up and use a parameter. Any questions about that? Okay, well, that's all I got for you guys this week. Hopefully, I know that was a lot to digest, and it's kind of getting pretty advanced here, but hopefully you kind of understand what's happening there. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always write them on the message board. And I will be doing office hours this week on Thursday, starting at probably around 10 a.m. Pacific to 2 p.m. Pacific. I'll be down there for a big old chunk of time. So stop by. If there isn't a time that works for you in office hours, just shoot me a little email or message on Reddit, and I'll try to set aside, a half hour for you sometime, some other time during the week. So as far as your assignment goes, I'll write this up and post it on Reddit, of course, but your assignment is going to be to create a dashboard that uses all 3 dashboard actions, so a filter, a highlight, and a URL, and to put a parameter in there. So I'll write that up and I'll share some data sets that will work well with that. But if you want to use your own data set, really the only requirement is that you're going to need to have a couple of variables that you can imagine switching with a parameter like we just did. So something that kind of works on the same level. And then also you're going to want a URL in there, so some kind of URL. So the data set I'll be providing you is probably going to be about Reddit, actually. So it's an interesting one if you don't have your own data, but if you do, just make sure it has a URL in it. All right, so any last questions before I sign off here? All right, well, thanks you guys. I will talk to you hopefully on Thursday, some of you, and if not, next week, and I'll get back to giving comments on any of those dashboards that I haven't yet in the thread. And all right, take care, have a good week. Bye.